Think of someone who hurt you with words once, maybe years ago. You just found the memory instantly, didn't you? Now think of someone who praised you just as sincerely. Notice how much longer that took. Somewhere in your memory, filed away with perfect clarity, is a sentence someone said to you maybe years ago. You remember the words. You might remember the room, the tone, even what you were wearing. Meanwhile, someone told you something kind last week, and it's already gone, dissolved somewhere you can't find it. You didn't choose which one to keep. Something else made that decision for you, and it made it a very long time ago. To understand why, you have to picture a version of your ancestors that had nothing to do with self-esteem. 300,000 years ago, a compliment could not kill you. A miscalculated threat could. If a member of your band looked at you differently one day, colder, more distant, that was not a minor social discomfort. It could be the first sign that you were being quietly pushed toward exile, and exile from a group of 30 people with no other group for miles was close to a death sentence. So your brain built a very specific kind of filing system. Good news got noted and moved on from. Bad news got locked, replayed, and studied from every angle. Because the cost of missing a real threat was so much higher than the cost of overreacting to a fake one. A wrong guess about a compliment cost you nothing. A wrong guess about a threat could cost you everything you had. In 2001, a psychologist named Roy Baumeister and his colleagues published a paper that would end up defining the entire field. It was called simply, "Bad is Stronger Than Good." They went looking across dozens of areas of human life, relationships, money, memory, health, and found the same asymmetry every single time. A single act of betrayal does more damage to a relationship than a single act of kindness does to repair it. A single financial loss feels worse than an equivalent financial gain feels good. Bad first impressions are harder to reverse than good ones are to build. Even in language itself, they noted, there are far more words for negative emotional states than positive ones, as if human vocabulary itself had evolved to track danger with more precision than delight. Baumeister's conclusion was blunt. Across nearly every domain they studied, bad events affected people more strongly, more quickly, and for longer than good ones of the same size. This wasn't a personality flaw showing up in a few unlucky people. It was a design feature showing up in everyone they measured. Around the same period, economists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky were mapping a very similar pattern from a completely different angle. They called it loss aversion. In their experiments, people offered a coin flip, win $100 or lose $100, mostly refused to play even though the math was perfectly even. Losing felt roughly twice as bad as winning felt good. It wasn't that people were bad at math, it was that somewhere underneath the math, an ancient calculator was still running, one that had never cared about being fair, only about not dying. A gain was nice. A loss, in the world that built you, could be the difference between eating this winter and not. Kahneman would later win a Nobel Prize partly for this finding, not because it was complicated, but because it explained so much ordinary human behavior that economists had spent decades assuming people simply weren't rational. Your memory runs on the same logic. Neuroscientists studying how the brain tags experiences for long-term storage have found that the amygdala, the small almond-shaped structure that handles threat detection, gets involved heavily whenever something registers as emotionally negative. And once the amygdala flags a memory, it doesn't just get stored. It gets stored with extra resources, more vivid detail, stronger emotional coding. Easier to retrieve later. Positive experiences get filed too, but without that same urgent stamp. Your brain isn't being pessimistic when it does this. It's doing exactly what it was built to do, treating the sentence that hurt you as data worth keeping close just in case you run into that person or someone like them, again, here's where it gets stranger, and more specific to insults exactly. A team led by psychologist John Gottman studied what happens in the brain in the first quarter of a second after someone sees something negative versus something positive. The negative stimulus produced a measurably larger spike in brain activity, faster and stronger, even when the two images were matched for intensity. Your brain isn't waiting to decide if an insult matters. It's already reacting before the sentence is even finished. Cacioppo called this the negativity bias, and he found it wasn't limited to language. It showed up for faces, for photographs, for sounds. Anything tagged as a potential threat got a faster, larger response than anything tagged as good news, as if the brain had a separate, faster lane reserved exclusively for danger. Now think about what this looks like in your actual life. A performance review with 9 positive notes and 1 piece of criticism. You know exactly which one you'll be turning over in your head at 11 that night. A comment section under something you posted, 97 kind replies, and 3 cruel ones. Researchers studying online interactions have repeatedly found that people remember and report far more emotional intensity from the small number of negative comments than the overwhelming majority of positive ones, even when they consciously know the ratio was lopsided in their favor. This isn't you being fragile. It's the same 11-word insult from a stranger in your ancestors' camp. The one that might have signaled you were about to be cast out, showing up wearing a different outfit. It gets more expensive than just memory. This bias shapes decisions in real time. Studies on workplace feedback have found that employees given one piece of negative feedback among several positive ones will often rate their entire performance lower than employees given only positive feedback, as if the single criticism quietly outweighed everything else in the room. Married couples have been studied this way too. Relationship researcher John Gottman spent years observing couples in what he called a love lab, tracking thousands of small interactions frame by frame, and found that stable, satisfied couples needed roughly 5 positive interactions to offset the damage of a single negative one. Not 1-to-1, 5-to-1. Couples who fell below that ratio were far more likely to separate within a few years, no matter how much affection existed underneath. That ratio wasn't a coincidence either. It was the exchange rate your brain has been running the whole time, just made visible in a lab. There's a reason this hits hardest with words specifically, more than with almost any other kind of negative event. Physical threats, at least, are usually finished quickly. A predator either catches you or it doesn't, and either way, the event ends. Words are different. An insult can be replayed endlessly, turned over from new angles, reinterpreted at 2 a.m. long after the person who said it has forgotten they ever spoke. Your ancestors' threat detection system was built for danger that resolved, one way or another, within minutes. It was never built for a sentence that a modern brain can now relitigate for the rest of its life, replaying the tone, the exact phrasing, the look on their face, searching for a threat that finished happening years ago. So why hasn't this faded? Why does a brain living in a world with therapists, comment moderation, and block numbers still weigh an insult 5 times heavier than a compliment? Because the tool that built this system doesn't know any of that changed. It only knows what it's always known. A negative signal from another person used to be information you could not afford to underweight, and there has not been enough evolutionary time, not even close, for that wiring to update. Your ancestors who forgot an insult too easily, who assumed everyone still liked them despite the warning signs, were the ones more likely to be caught off guard when the group finally turned on them. The ones who remembered obsessively exactly who had turned cold toward them and why, adjusted their behavior and survived to raise children who inherited that same obsessive memory. Every generation between them and you kept the trait, because in their world, it worked. Here's the part that should change how you carry this. That comment still sitting in your memory, word for word, years later, is not proof that you're too sensitive, or that you dwell too much, or that something is wrong with how your mind works. It's proof that your mind is working exactly as designed, running threat assessment software built for a world where a single enemy in a camp of 30 people could end you, now running on a world of strangers on the internet and one offhand remark from a coworker who forgot the conversation by lunch. The software never got the update. It's still treating every sharp word like it might be the first sign of exile, still filing it away with the same urgency your ancestors once needed to survive a much smaller, much more dangerous world. You will likely never remember the name of the 5th person who said something kind to you this month. You will very likely remember, in exact wording, the one person who said something cruel to you a decade ago, somewhere in a camp that no longer exists. That memory once kept your ancestors alive. It's still standing guard today at a door nothing is actually coming through.